recording.
All right.
All right, so let's put something in. Okay. So,
So you want to talk about the, you said before we get into the take a swing at this, you want to hit on the review thing a little bit before then, or sort of like
maybe
hey,
work it in, or what? Is it too early at that point?
well, no, I think that was the
Yeah,
you know,
just
that
to
was
kinda
what you were
get
trying to say,
attention,
like
yeah.
not make it as canned as some of the other stuff right now, but if you
Mhm.
want to
Mm-hmm.
throw out
Yep.
that it's hey, we're looking,
We're back,
building,
and
we're building an audience, and
Mhm.
we're looking for some reviews.
Mm-hmm.
If you're listening and you're one of the regulars, throw in, take the time to throw in a review
Yeah.
wherever you
Yep.
are.
Yep. Yeah.
And then we'll go into that, and
Okay.
then we're still doing the
Okay.
individual
Yep.
call outs as we go along.
All right. So then we'll stay on this, and then we'll do that quick thing.
Yeah,
And then we'll do.
the
swing
take
at
a
this.
swing at this, and then you'll do. I'll do the take a swing at this, and then you do the tips. All right.
Okay.
And this is rolling.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to actually start now because we have two time codes we're on now. Welcome to the Blair Witch edition.
And you know what? With the cameras, with this cool, because now we got light off all of these
we
things.
are beautiful.
All right. Ready?
Go.
Welcome back to Street Writers.
It's 10 minutes of writing motivation, inspiration, and activation.
All right. So before we get started,
Yes.
listen, we got a big audience out there. It's bigger than the 6 or 5 that we started with.
Bigger
It's
than
about
it starts.
6 times than that.
Uh-huh.
So a little favor from those of you listening, maybe first time, whatever. Throw us a star or 5. Like give us
5.
A little,
Definitely
5.
go for
Throw
the
us 5. Give us a little review. It all helps. People look at that stuff, and if you're here, and if you've been here a couple of times and you like it, and it's the cost of 0 to do it, and it would really help us. So please, if you get a chance, just throw a quick review on there.
And thank you for the props in advance.
That's
There we
right.
go.
Thank you. All right, now.
Now I'll do take a swing, and then you do that.
Yep.
All right.
And you're gonna do.
And then I'll do the cliche.
Yep.
Yep. Take a swing at this.
These are the tips, tricks, and sleight of hand to power up your pencil and percolate your brain.
So we've been saying this so many times now. You might even think of it as a cliche, but it's our original language.
There you go.
So I thought a good tip to talk about is to avoid cliches.
Yes.
And we think about cliches, especially very often. I know from a lot of the ad work we've done,
Right.
from a visual point of view.
Right.
We're always talking to art directors and avoiding the obvious in
Right.
visuals.
Right.
Innovation, brainstorming, everybody comes out with the light bulb.
Right.
How many times do we see
Yep.
this? But within language, it's equally important, and I think even more important because you can let it go in a simpler way.
Right.
And I've done this myself, and I've seen other writers do it, where it's easy as pie.
Sure.
It's white as snow.
Right.
And it's I'm communicating it quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But no less than George Orwell, which we'll name drop him,
Mm-hmm.
maybe get him on the podcast. Said never use a metaphor, simile, or other figure of speech which you're used to seeing in print. And I think it's lazy language.
Yeah.
And more importantly, I think from a reader's point of view or listener's point of view,
Mm-hmm.
you gloss over that stuff.
You do.
Right? Easy as pie. Okay, I register that, but I've moved on.
Right.
And so it's important from a writing point of view
Right.
to create different language.
Mm-hmm.
And one way to do this is be mindful of what you're writing.
Yeah.
And then grab that phrase,
Right.
grab that white as snow,
Right.
write it down on another sheet or whatever, and then start writing the alternatives.
Yeah.
Write them out until you find that language that is yours and refreshes. Not get to something so complicated,
Right.
as pure as, a vermilion drift in the Russian Siberian, horizons or whatever, but just something that gives it more of what is you.
Right, right. And we do, we're trained to, communicate and convey, so that's what cliches have a reason to exist, and it's a checkoff. It's just kind of a code. Like this is, I want to say that's as clear. It's as clear as a bell.
Right.
That kind of stuff. But I think, again, that's the point of this show, is that writing's not easy.
No.
So you should be aware of anything that's easy when you write. I mean, you need to know that if you're on a roll and you're just belting out cliches and stuff, go ahead and belt them out. But like you just said, go back to them and evaluate them and stuff.
Because what you're thinking you're doing, which is, I'm clearly communicating and I'm getting my point across in a rapid fashion.
Right.
I don't think you actually are.
No.
I think because of that laziness of the language, or the fact that everybody kind of gets it, I think your audience, your reader, I think they'll just gloss right over it.
And I think not only will they gloss over it, they'll punish you.
Yeah.
Like if I'm reading a novel and I see, needle in a haystack, then I'm thinking, wait, it takes you out of the magic of that story.
Yeah.
You could be in a World War II story, you could be in a science fiction or wherever, and then you see a cliche, and you say, oh yeah, I forgot the writer was doing this.
Sure.
And that just throws, and the flip side of it is when somebody puts in the time to come up with a simile or a metaphor, something like that, that's brand new, you could fall in love even more.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
I kind of find that there are people who have talent beyond belief to come up with descriptions and stuff. And I always say I'm not a good descriptive writer. And I think there are actually two choices here. If you wrote it was as white as snow, or it's as clear as a bell and stuff, go ahead and write it, that first draft and stuff. But then when you go back, if you feel it's worth investing in,
right,
then go ahead and come up with something that's amazing. If not, then just say it was white.
Right.
It's like
David Quinn said this a couple episodes ago. Right now, fix later. Right.
Yes.
So get that down.
Yes.
But go back in.
Right.
And I think once you start doing this,
Right.
it starts to then move to other places where you might be doing cliched approaches to things beyond simply the use of the language, but the way you're positioning things.
Right.
All victims are innocent. All politicians are corrupt.
Right.
Everything within that, there's nuance, and people appreciate that.
Yeah. And to your point earlier, though, you may be writing a novel, you may be writing a screenplay, whatever it is. You do have to make decisions, and so you may feel that this. I see I wrote this cliche. I want to fix that. As you said, you may not be able to talk about spend a whole paragraph on how white something is. So you have to make the choice of, okay, I'm going to just go straight with this. I'm just going to say it was white, and you're going to make that choice a million times throughout. But the one choice you can't make is to leave in the lazy language, because you'll pull your reader out of the experience and
that's
that
exactly
magic.
Exactly it. All right.
And then we're done. That's
We're done.
clear as a bell,
yes.
man.
That was easy as pie.
That's right, easy as pie. All right, cool.
What we do? Got a tip
Sure,
to share? All right.
yeah.
Got a tip to share?
Send it to street.
All right, never mind. Well, I'll just do the
that
whole
again.
thing. Got a tip to share? Send it to streetriders.podcast@gmail.com.
Beautiful. All right. Now, you're going to do the craft.
Yeah.
All right, so you will say they beat us to the punch.
Okay. They beat us to the punch.
Admiring the craft or just being jealous of it.
I don't know if I could be jealous of this one because of the subject matter is almost against jealousy. So Tom Juno, who is an amazing writer,
We'll love him.
has done a lot of terrific writing. Esquire, Atlantic, I believe, are two places where he's often featured. And a number of years ago, he wrote an article about Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers.
Right.
The famous Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood TV show. And there's a film coming out pretty soon to when we're going to get this podcast out there about him. Tom Hanks plays him. And this article has resurfaced in a pretty big way.
Right.
And the language in it is amazing. And what's particularly striking about this to me is Tom Juno is especially known as I'm going to say a takedown artist of a writer, in the sense he had a very cynical point of view, and he would approach subjects in a very, cutting way.
Right.
So to send him after Mr. Rogers to do a profile piece was almost like, what are you going to find about this guy?
Yeah.
That's either the real truth, or I'm going to bring the snark to this purity.
Right.
And in fact, it was a pretty amazing piece that this guy wrote called, Can You Say Hero?
Right.
And what I particularly the whole thing is amazing, but this passage I think captures a lot. And the way he also structured the whole piece was in a very Mr. Rogers sort of way.
Right.
So I just think this is amazing language, and also it gets you the feels, and
Yeah.
it also captures a writer capturing his subject through the way he approaches things. So he's talking about a book that was being written that Mr. Rogers was supposed to contribute something to.
Right.
The doctors were ophthalmologists. An ophthalmologist is a doctor who takes care of the eyes. Sometimes ophthalmologists have to take care of the eyes of children, and some children get very scared because children know that their world disappears when their eyes close, and they can be afraid that the ophthalmologist will make their eyes close forever. The ophthalmologist did not want to scare children, so they asked Mr. Rogers for help, and Mr. Rogers agreed to write a chapter for a book the ophthalmologists were putting together, a chapter about what other ophthalmologists would do to calm the children who came to their offices. Because Mr. Rogers is such a busy man, however, he could not write the chapter himself, and he asked a woman who worked for him to write it instead. She worked very hard at writing the chapter until one day she showed what she had written to Mr. Rogers, who read it and crossed it all out and wrote a sentence addressed directly to the doctors who would be reading it. You were a child once too. And that's the whole opening, that he went for. And the cadence of that, if you're familiar with Mr. Rogers, is very Mr. Rogers.
Yeah.
And it just, to me, captures like so much. And then that editing,
Right.
from his point of view of like whatever that very informed piece I'm sure that woman wrote,
Right.
About education and intent and her whole background and experience. But really, the thing that he wanted to capture, and the most important thing for those doctors, was you were a child once. So many layers to that, and what Juno saw.
Beautiful.
Yeah, terrific.
Ah, wonderful. And there will be a movie coming out, right, about Mr. Rogers meeting with a reporter, right?
Right. It is. Yeah. The conceit of the movie is that a writer who is essentially Juno, although he asked for them to, because I guess they introduced a lot of dramatic elements.
Sure.
He asked them to change the name,
Right.
but in essence, that is the story of this writer, Juno, meeting Mr. Rogers and sort of being transformed through it.
Right.
And Tom Hanks plays Mr. Rogers, and
Brilliant.
you can't go wrong with that.
Can't go wrong with that. All right.
So we're going to. You want to do this one? Writing is knocking you out.
Do we have to got a tip to share? Do we do?
Oh,
that?
we did that. This is
Oh,
the.
right. Yep.
Yep.
So what writing is knocking you out? Tell us about it at anchor.fm/streetwriters/message.
Super.
Okay.
All right. And we got this one.
Yep.
So you're doing Josh, right?
Right, I'm going to do Josh on this
Okay.
one.
So
I'll do hit us with your
yep.
best shot. Hit us with your best shot.
it's time to get in the ring with us.
We both have a wonderful friend,
Yes, we
Josh Corder. We knew from advertising, and I was his partner, and you were his partner
I was,
too.
yeah, absolutely.
So he's a brilliant art director who's also a brilliant writer, and he left the business to become
Real.
Yeah, exactly, to find a life. I think.
Yes,
But
exactly.
He is now a Buddhist teacher. He
Yes.
leads a group called Dharma Punks in New York, and he's written and traveled extensively. And brilliant man, still a funny, quirky dude that you could have a
No
laugh
doubt,
with.
yeah.
And a while back, he asked if I could help him on to help promote a book he wrote. And the book is called, I'll cut this, but let me pull it up from here.
That's right. Let's get to our product placement.
That's right. Hold on. The book is called Unsubscribe, Opt Out of Delusion, Tune Into Truth.
And it's a great book. I read it. Yep.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
And Josh being Josh, we had a ball. He asked if I could do it, and he said I didn't have a lot of money. I said, you got money for lunch? We're covered. So we had a great lunch. But we did this thing where he's a big bicyclist. And in Brooklyn, he's kind of famous, the bald tattooed guy riding around on this cool little bike. And I like to ride. So we strapped up a couple of cameras, or one camera on a backpack and a tripod, and we met in the city, and starting from Grand Central, worked our way down to Washington Square Park, and we'd get off the bike and we would just shoot him at different corners, and then we would have all the people behind him, and then we did time-lapse kind of things because he was getting across this idea. He wrote the script. He's a brilliant writer. And it was this idea we all moved too fast. And he would stand still so you had all this action
Stuff
behind him.
around him. And initially, you were creating this as kind of like a trailer for the book.
For the book,
Yeah.
So it's a trailer for the book. And then we ended up traveling, stopped on the Brooklyn Bridge, went into Brooklyn, stopped over in Dumbo, got to his place, and then we turned it around. It went from this kind of like creepy tint to a beautiful full color of him slowing down and talking, and then giving a session in a Brooklyn place filled to the rafters. So we did it for his book, and then we turned it into a story. And what we did, or what I did, was we still talked about the book, but we intercut spots of him, with kind of title cards describing his life. And it's been a very interesting life, and challenges and stuff like that to get to where he is today. And we then packaged it as a 2-minute micro documentary.
So were you intending to make the documentary when you made the trailer, or,
No.
or just because of the footage that you captured?
Yeah, just because of the footage and because he's so interesting. And it's a message, we've been in advertising and we've sold our soul for many a thing.
Right.
But to say people should hear this, and he's that, he helps people. You see, this Brooklyn place was packed, and
Oh yeah, I've seen the footage of not just from your piece,
Right.
but just when they do
Yeah,
the Dharma
so-
Punk sessions. Yeah.
exactly. So he's making a difference in people's lives, and it was like, well, let's get him in film festivals.
Yeah.
Let's get that word
Did
out
he know
there.
you were making that
No.
mini documentary when you made the trailer? You decided
No,
afterwards.
Afterwards,
Yeah.
yeah. So because the content was so interesting, and then he said, sure, go ahead, let's see if we get it in. So we've gotten it to some different festivals. We just found out we got it in this other cool festival called the Picasso Einstein Buddha International Film Festival, and it says it's the Picasso for the prosperity of art, Einstein for the enigma of science, and Buddha, the bridge of humanity. So we were kind of thrilled to get it into another festival. I think it's like their 4th or 5th we've got it in. A lot of these kind of Spirit Quest festival, we had it in that. But it's nice to get. I'd love to go to these things just to see where
Right.
all these things intersect. But also it comes back to you shoot something, you may shoot it one way, and then find a story for something else.
Again and again. I mean, you brought that up many times, and it becomes raw material.
Yes.
Right? Anything you're doing there becomes material that, from a writing point of
Right.
view, a storytelling point of view, you can go back in
Right.
and figure out some different moves,
Right.
to take on it.
Yeah, there's always a possibility. It's
Right.
definitely more than a needle in a haystack.
Awesome.
See how we circled
Oh,
back
nice.
there?
There's a cliche.
Thank
Wait a
you.
minute. There you
All
go.
right, so that's it.
All right.
All right, so now.
So we got the finish, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So you want to do the first one?
Yeah, take it through the email. All right. Be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and connect with us at streetriders.podcast@gmail.com.
Tell your friends to listen and their friends too.
Take it to the streets.
And fight to right.
Nice.
Awesome.
All right. Yeah, God knows what that looks like. And we're getting that part on there, too. Welcome to the Blair Witch.
exactly.
Blair Witch podcast.